Okay, so in this video we are going to talk about how to solve equations using inverse operations. So what the idea here is we want to solve for the variable, and the way we do that is we use inverse operations, which means the opposite operations. And the goal is we want to isolate the variable on one side so that it's all by itself. So a couple steps to keep in mind are that usually you want to add or subtract the opposite first. So usually you want to add or subtract the opposite, and second you want to multiply or divide by the same number attached to the variable. And I'm going to say AKA, it's also known as the coefficient, which is what we talked about earlier in the polynomials unit. So those are a few steps that you want to keep in mind, but you always want to think opposites, okay? So big thing is you got to think opposites. So I'm going to go through a few examples now of how to do this. Okay, so here's example 1. So we want to write down the statement below and then solve for the variables. So what you'll notice is all of these are one-step equations. It means we only need to do one step in order to solve for the variable. So we're going to take each statement and write down what this is as an equation. So let's take the first example, letter A. 3 times a number is negative 3.6. So 3 times a number, so it's 3 times a number. We don't know what that number is, so we're going to give that a variable. But what you need to remind yourself is that when a variable is beside a number or a coefficient, that is multiplication. So this shows 3 times the number is usually represents an equal sign and negative 3.6. So this is saying 3 times x is equal to negative 3.6. So our goal is we want to solve for the variable and isolate the variable so that it's all by itself. So how we do that is on the left side we have our variable, so we want to get x by itself. So remember, we got to think opposites. So 3 is multiplying x, so you want to do the opposite of what's happening in the equation. So in order to do that, opposite of multiplication is division. So I want to divide this side by the same number. Okay, the key is you want to divide it by the exact same number. But you also need to remember that whatever we do to one side of the equation, we also need to do to the other side of the equation. So that cancels out our 3's there. And what we're left with is x equals negative 3.6 divided by 3 is negative 1.2. So there's that answer, okay? So we want to isolate our variable, and the way we do that is we do opposites. So this was only a one-step equation, so it was very quick to answer this question. So second example is a number, which means x, divided by 4 equals is, so it's a number, usually that's the variable, divided by 4 is 1.5. So this time, x is being divided by 4. We want to get the x by itself. So since x is being divided by 4, the opposite of division is multiplication, which means we want to multiply both sides by 4. Okay? What happens is when you have a 4 on the top and 4 on the bottom, so 4 divided by 4 is 1, so those just cancel out. And all we're left with is x is equal to, I think, 6. So these were just one-step equations. A couple things to remember is a number usually is represented by a variable, and the word is the equal sign. And remember, opposites, so if you're multiplying on one side, you want to divide in order to get rid of that number to isolate x. But if you're dividing a number by, or if you're dividing x by a certain number, then you need to multiply. So think opposites. So those are a few examples. All right, so we just finished solving one-step equations. Now we are going to move to two-step equations, which means it's going to require 2 steps for us to solve for the variable. So what we need to do is remember that you want to do opposites, and you usually want to start off with adding or subtracting the opposite. So keep in mind that usually the last step that you want to do is either divide or multiply. And usually we need to add or subtract first to get rid of a number that's on the left side. So this is what I mean. So we have an equation here, 4.5d minus 3.2 equals negative 18.5. So remember, the goal is you want to get rid of everything that's attached to the variable. So the first thing I want to do is I want to get rid of this negative 3.2. So the opposite of negative 3.2 is positive 3.2. But you got to remember that whatever I do to one side, I need to also do to the other side. So I need to add 3.2 to this side. Awesome. But what you need to know is negative 3.2 plus 3.2 means that these cancel out and end up being 0, okay? So you want to write down what you have left on the left side and the right side. So on this left side, since the negative 3.2 got canceled out by the positive 3.2, you have 4.5d left on the left side of the equal sign. And on this side, all you need to simply do is recalculate what this is. So you have 18.5 or negative 18.5 plus 3.2. And what that equals is negative 15.3. All right, so we have one more step that we need to do. So on the left side, we have 4.5 times d is equal to negative 15.3. So 4.5 is multiplying d. I don't want that there. So the opposite of multiplication is division. But we need to divide both sides by the same thing. But 4.5 divided by 4.5, that cancels out. And on the left side, I have d left over is equal to, so negative 15.3 divided by 4.5 is equal to negative 3.4. So that's how you do that one. Let me go to letter B. So you have r divided by 4 plus 3 is equal to 7.2. So keep in mind, again, you always want to subtract or add first. So I have this plus 3 here on the left side. So to get rid of the plus 3, I need to subtract by 3 on the left side and then subtract by 3 on the right side. Because whatever you do to one side, you also need to do to the other. So this plus 3 and minus 3, they cancel out. And what I have left is r divided by 4 is equal to 4.2. All right, so what I'm left with now is r divided by 4 is equal to 4.2. So remember, the goal is I want to get my r by itself, but right now it's being divided by a 4. So the opposite of division is multiplication. So I need to multiply both sides by 4. And try to use the brackets instead of the times sign. Just put brackets and then multiply both sides by 4. So this 4 cancels out with a 4 in the bottom. And now I am left with my r by itself, which is what I want. And I need to do 4.2 times 4, which is equal to 16.8. So there's the answer for that. So keep in mind again, with two steps, usually you want to add or subtract the opposite first, and then you want to multiply or divide by whatever the coefficient is that is attached to the variable. So those are some examples on how to do two-step. Okay, so last example, we have kind of a problem, but we're going to use an equation to model the problem and then to solve for the unknown. So it says a rectangle has a length of 3.7, so keep in mind it's a rectangle, and a perimeter of 13.2 centimeters. So you need to keep in mind that perimeter is the outside length of the shape. So let's draw this out just so that we know what it looks like. So here's my rectangle. There's my rectangle. I know that the length is 3.7 centimeters, so that's that. However, the question does not tell us what the width is, so since those are unknowns, I'm going to put an x on this side and an x on this side. All right, so that's the picture for our rectangle. So question A says, write an equation that can be used to determine the width of the rectangle. So we need to remember that perimeter is adding up all the sides together. So that's 3.7 plus x plus 3.7 plus x. And that all equals 13.2 because the question gives us the perimeter. However, we can simplify this. We combine our x's together, so it's x plus 3.7 plus 3.7. So x plus x is simply 2x, 3.7 plus 3.7 is simply 7.4. So both of these are equal to 13.2. So that's A. So solve the equation B. Solve the equation. So we're just going to solve for x. So this is our equation right here. Let me just rewrite it. Perfect. So that's our equation. We want to solve for x. So I have 2x, or 2 times x plus 7.4. So keep in mind, we always want to add or subtract the opposite. So I have a positive 7.4 here. So I want to subtract by 7.4 on both sides. So 7.4 minus 7.4, these cancel out. So all I'm left with is 2x is equal to 13.2 minus 7.4. So we're going to figure out what that equals. 13.2 minus 7.4 is equal to 5.8. So I have one step left. This is 2 times x is equal to 5.8. The opposite of multiplying is dividing, so I simply need to divide both sides by 2. So that gets rid of that. And all I'm left with is x is equal to 5.8 divided by 2, which is 2.9. So that's good. We won't verify the solution, so we'll omit that. So again, keep in mind, you want to think opposites. You want to add or subtract the opposite first, and then either divide or multiply by the coefficient. And key thing, whatever you do to one side, you also need to do to the other side of the equation. So hopefully those are some examples that will help you out to finish your booklet.